Once upon a time, two friends joined forces to bring you the best in horror entertainment. Brian from the north, Tim from the south, each bringing their own unique perspective to the horror community. Movie reviews, Blu-ray releases, beer pairings, games, and more. Welcome to your new home for horror. This is Civil Gore.
All right, everyone. So, in what has become a time honored Civil Gore tradition, we have with us tonight our good friend David Weiner, the unofficial third host of the Civil Gore podcast, to talk about his next amazing upcoming horror documentary, In Search of Darkness, 1995 to 1999. So, welcome back to the show, David.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate you keeping my chair warm. I am kind of a bit of a nomad, but I do find myself wandering back every now and then. So, hanging out with Pierce Brosnan, and the other nomads. But I'm
Yeah.
Yeah. I know we're a step up from that slightly, but no, I'm just kidding. Yeah, but we're gonna need to get him a whole new color jacket because that gold 5-timer jacket is like, I think we need
No.
it's like what beats that like
Like platinum
I
or
don't know.
something? I don't know.
Platinum? I know. Is that what it is? What's the highest thing? And we need that. It just has to and it needs to
tinsel.
light up,
Tinsel.
say "In Search of" on it, So.
Yeah,
Yes, tinsel.
exactly.
Tinsel. Get me one of those like silver 1979 Star Trek the Motion Picture jackets that you can get the back
Oh,
of
there
Star
you go.
Wars.
There you go.
There
So,
you go.
David, you need no introduction. If anybody's been listening to this podcast for any length of time, they've heard you before. But for anybody that's just joining us, can you give us just a kind of brief bio of kind of your background and what you're responsible for with the In Search of Darkness series?
Yeah, sure. I will condense 20 plus years of working in the industry. Probably more at this point. Actually, I dropped a decade because I'm modest. But I'm a East Coaster who became a West Coaster. I went to film school in Ithaca, New York, and headed my car west and wanted to work in the movies. And so I worked on production on TV commercials, music videos, lots of films. And my career in Hollywood has been a long time thing that ultimately swerved into working at Entertainment Tonight, entertainment journalism, ultimately becoming the editor of Famous Monsters of Filmland magazine. And starting in 2018, I kind of finally got around to making some movies, and I make documentaries. And I make the In Search of Darkness documentaries, and I also made In Search of Tomorrow. These are movies that are anywhere between 4 to 6 hours long, where they take a look at a whole decade of a genre. And so In Search of Darkness, we started with the 80s, going 1980, 1989. In each year, we cherry pick about 12, 15 movies, get the people who are in front of the camera, behind the camera, who were there, who made the movies. In between each year, you got a larger context chapter where you talk about other things like the music or the special effects, the zeitgeist of the era. And what's fun about all of these is that the people that I get to sit in front of the camera, it's a real big celebration, and it's nostalgia. It's kind of infotainment, but they get to talk about the stuff that they love as fans, as well as talking about their own projects. And this is the likes of John Carpenter or Robert Englund or Heather Langenkamp or Barbara Crampton. You name it, these casts are sizable, especially after a trio of 80s movies. And now I'm doing two 90s. So I did part one, 1990 to 1994, and released that at the end of last year. And now I am in production on 95 to 99.
Yeah, and I just watched part one recently, and it's amazing. I absolutely love these documentaries, and I was thinking today, and I'm not saying this just because David's on. These are not only some of the best horror documentaries you're going to find, they're some of the most, I think, some of the most important horror documentaries ever made, because they are such a time capsule of these decades. I mean, they are like a Bible to if you're a new horror fan and you just want to know, like, what 80s horror should I watch? What 90s horror should I watch? These are like incredibly valuable documentaries to watch. And there's so many hours of content that you could go through. And every one I watch, as many horror films as I've watched, I always find some horror movie I've never heard of that I have to go track down. And in fact, I'm working through a list now of every movie featured in every In Search of Darkness documentaries thus far. And I'm trying to watch all the ones I've missed. So they are absolutely incredible.
Quite a task, quite a challenge. Yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say funny, Tim, that you said that with the, how like a new horror fan. So I wanna give you David, I promised my sister-in-law I would tell you this. I gave you want a great compliment here is so I was watching I had earmarked a Sunday like, blocked off, like, 6 hours. I'm like, "Okay, I'm watching this," the 90 to 94 one. I said I was all excited, my Blu-ray was here, I was all ready to go, and I was gonna watch it, and I sat there, and I was about an hour or so into it, and my sister-in-law had came over to visit, so we were I think my wife was off doing some working on something, and so she came to the back, see what I was doing, and I said, "Oh, I'm watching this horror documentary. Do you wanna watch some of it?" And she's like, "Oh, okay, yeah, I'll look at it, I'll watch a little of it," and I said, "I'm preparing you, there's, like, 5 hours left." And she's like, "Oh, okay, yeah, I'll probably," 'cause she's not really super into horror. But she's like certain types. Like, and I've been like curating her horror viewing for her basically. And so she sat down and was starting to watch it. And before we knew it, the whole thing was over. And she sat through the entire rest of this thing. And I was like, "I am so sorry I made you sit through that now." I feel like she goes, "No, I loved it. This was so interesting." She's like, "It was so like I didn't know about half these things." And it was funny because a couple times I kind of jumped the gun when I'm like when they show you started to show a clip, I said, "Oh, this is funny. I wonder if they're gonna mention this." And sure enough, you mentioned that exact thing. So I'm like, I'm just gonna be quiet because I know he's got it covered here. And but she loved it. And she's like, and I'm like, I'm gonna make sure I pass that on to David the next time we talk to him because that shows that just hits Tim's point to a T because it shows that someone who's just into like, will watch a horror movie every now and then could find themselves sitting for 5 hours on a documentary like this of this stature. And it was just it was fun because I was like watching it and I kept looking over to see like her expression and she'd like there'd be parts where there would be a like a gory scene or something going on. She'd be like, "Oh," or she goes, "Oh, I remember watching that actually." So it was like it's funny to see someone like, because like I said, I remember my wife sat through some of them with me, but she also sits through a lot of horror with me. She likes it. She'll go to the thing. So it was funny to see someone who's not really a quote unquote horror fan at all get so much enjoyment out of your work. So I'm like, I mean, I feel like that's got to be like such a great compliment to you for that you've reached like literally everybody.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. You see, that's my master plan is everyone has to grab their friends and relatives and say, "Oh, just sit down for a little bit. It's way long. You won't sit here for very long." And then it's like flypaper; they get stuck. But that's a wonderful compliment, and that means a lot to me. But I want to make sure to single out my amazing editor, Alex Townley. Alex Townley did an amazing job. He's doing 95 to 99 now, and of course, Alex learned he didn't learn anything. He's a great editor, but he basically absorbed the template that was created by Samuel Way for the first trio of documentaries of In Search of Darkness and as well as In Search of Tomorrow. These guys, they just do absolute magic, and when these things come together, they know how to just keep the pace going. The sound design, the way the music is integrated. We've Dream Invaders doing these new 90s movies. We had Weary Pines doing the first three, doing unique scores for these. It's really kind of a wonderful alchemy of a very small but dedicated team who wants to create something that is enjoyable to watch and something we'd want to see. And hey, clearly it's a formula that works because talk about going back to the well. It's like if I knew that I was going to be making so many of these movies based on this one formula, this one structure that we came up with, that Robin Block came up with when he first said, we're going to do one all about the 80s where it's every single movie. We'll just do every movie year by year. That was the paper napkin pitch. When has there been a movie just only about 80s movies? They're the best. Let's do every single movie year by year, and it'll be probably 2.5 hours long.
A little
That,
off on that
that's
one.
that sounds funny, but that was the initial idea.
Yeah. Well,
Stretch goal will go up to 3 hours if we make a certain amount on our Kickstarter.
think you need to make the 24-hour one. But, what I was gonna say is I hate to correct people, but you said you made some documentaries. I'd like to correct that to you made the documentaries, like the premier documentaries, to echo again Tim's sentiments, because I don't, it's like I know, yeah, everyone will say, oh, it's just you're saying that because he's here. No, I literally tell other people too. I'm like, it's like if you ever really want to see like documentary for, because most people think of documentaries as like these low with his voice going like, and the fires in the Amazon
Yeah.
have been burning since 1912.
That's really good. I
Oh,
wanna
thank you.
see that documentary. Alright, go on.
I was pitching by voice for your next one, but I don't know if that worked or not. But no, but I think people think there's this documentary, but what like I think yours does, and I know we've said this before, yours captures, it's informative while also capturing a feeling and bringing back this wave of nostalgia that really just the combo of those two things can't be understated because it is such a it's like a warm feeling to watch these things because your memories just come flooding back. It's like looking at family photographs kinda thing for, like, horror fans.
I gotta say, I never thought I'd live in a day and age where I'm contributing to a subset of types of films, the documentary film, which there's all sorts of ways to approach documentaries. But, when I was growing up, that's what it was like Mutual of Omaha, it's like, Wild Kingdom. It's like, you did the voice perfectly, so I won't ape it again, literally, figuratively. But it's like, I remember documentaries, sure, they were interesting, but it was like what your teachers made you watch when they were kinda tired of and, like, they had no curriculum for the day. They put on some boring documentary where they talked like this. And then the first time I actually paid attention to documentaries where I'm like, wow, you could go epic length and do like really just squeeze that lemon dry. That would be the Kevin Burns documentaries like Civil War and baseball and everything that he's done. And to ultimately live in a time when I've actually been called by some people, not a lot, but some people have called me, and I don't call myself this, the Ken Burns of horror documentaries. But we what I'm saying is getting to is collectively people love documentaries so much more now. I think documentaries evolved. I think the people who grew up to be able to make their own documentaries were like, screw this, man. Documentaries I grew up with, they were boring. I could tell the exact same story, give the same information, and make it compelling and interesting and something you really want to watch. And however that started, that really did catch fire, And I owe a lot to
That's why it was Ken Burns because, sorry, I couldn't resist.
that was good, but that's
Yeah.
all week, not the veal. But I do owe a huge tip of the hat to Never Sleep Again and Crystal Lake Memories,
Yeah,
the
I was
two
gonna mention those.
documentaries about all the Friday the 13th movies and all the Nightmare on Elm Street movies, because those paved the way for me to say an audience wants a long documentary. They will sit there. They will clamor for it versus be subjected to it. And let's give it a go, because our structure kind of demands it. It wasn't my intention at first, but when I put 10 years of films listed and chapters in between, we flew way past 4 hours just on the first one. And I really had to scale it back even then for the first one that came out. And we still didn't know when we put this out there if this was going to fly. We actually, top secret information, before we put out the first In Search of Darkness, we surveyed a bunch of the backers. We did a cross section where they got to see the rough cut. And one of the questions was, what do you think of the length of this movie? Is this too long? Is this not long enough? Too short? What's your take on it? And collectively, save for one or two, folks who just were like, oh my God, that's way too long. Most of the people were just like, more, more, more. This is too short. Can you do more? And we were sort of, had the handcuffs on in terms of the DVD format in terms of how much space, material we could put on that the DVD could hold. And then when we did Blu-ray as well, we inevitably had to go to a dual layer disc just to be able to contain all the information for, just a 1080 film, 1080, what's the word? Just the not 4K,
I
not
know I can't
720,
the
the
resolution?
1080 resolution, you know. So anyway, that's the exciting inside baseball of we still did kind of a little test market survey, and people really said absolutely. And then when the first one came out, people said, "Oh my God, this is great. Too bad it's not long enough," you know.
Well, it's funny you said so. I promise I'm gonna actually get to Tim's like, all right, well, you Brian, you're gonna ask your question. But yeah, no, I just you said something that made that made you know how you said like, oh yeah, versus the documentary we were forced to watch. I'm wondering if too the horror documentaries have been such a thing because we've all discussed this on the show and with you and then other times on the show and stuff where horror was that one point that loner group where, where everyone felt like they were like in this hard group. And now like the documentaries kind of legitimizes it, the love of it, especially the older ones that you watch. I wonder if you think that's anything to do with why like the hard documentaries become so good and so popular.
We're finally being spoken to, perhaps. I mean, I think back and I try and think of what was, back in the day. Not too long ago, but I guess it's 40 plus years now. There was Terror in the Isles, and
Oh yeah,
I
I
remember
remember
that was
that.
a theatrical release, also. That was a sort of a format where you have Donald Pleasance and Nancy Allen kind of hosting, an audience and examining horror, but it was also like the ultimate clip show for Universal. You know, there were arguably not horror movies in there, but it was Universal, so they wedged them in there. But that's a great movie, and I think as the years have gone by, I mean, I certainly have certain, there were certain things I would seek out just because I loved the movie, so I wanted to know more. I mean, you know, um, Just Desserts, all about Creep Show.
Oh yeah, yeah.
That's a cool documentary. Or You're Too Cool, Brewster. The story
Oh, I need to see that
of
one.
Fright Night. I mean, they're a dime a dozen. There are so many of them out there, but those are ones for me where unfortunately I don't remember what it's called, but there's one about Galaxy Quest too. Um,
Oh, I think I saw that on Tubi, like as I was scrolling through
but
there or
yeah,
something.
these are they're out there, and these are, I think, what it comes down to answer your question just again the same way, is it speaks to us, and so. Much like a Famous Monsters magazine calling to you on on the shelf at the newsstand, where oh, there's no good comics. What else is there? Oh, it's just Sports Illustrated and Business Week. The Playboy's at the top and it's wrapped up. I can't get a sneak peek at that. There's Ellery Queen. Oh, wait, what's this? Famous Monsters? Creepy? Fangoria? Wait, are these for me? Mom, please, please, please. I swear I won't get nightmares. Um, these are things that are incredibly important to us. And gosh, we live in just sort of geek heaven now, that you could walk around with a geek shirt and not get beaten up at school. You're cool. Everyone does it. Yes, I'm in school, and yes, I still wear geek shirts. But it's like I think times have changed. I mean, I was like the ultimate Trekkie, but boy, I did not dare wear my like Don Moore Star Trek shirt at school, lest I wanted to be stuffed into a basket. So times change.
Well, I'll finally get now actually moving from that to get to my question kind of fits in a little bit in terms of the two documentaries. So with the obviously with the 80s ones, that was super popular because 80s was, it was so huge. And your latest one, of course, 90s and 94 was absolutely incredible again. And even for like a kind of a decade that some people find like they polarizing a little bit. They're like, "Oh, 90s horror," but it's still when you I think this documentary will help people see how good 90s horror was. I think you might have forgotten.
That was
But so
uh,
what oh, sorry. Were we
well, you're probably going to ask. I know you're about to ask a question. That's the lead up, but I'd like to just interject and say that was the challenge, because so many people dismissed the '90s as a kind of this memory hole of there wasn't anything good. It was bad CGI. The '80s were better. Nothing really happened until gosh, Scream maybe. That's like the casual fan, the casual horror person when I think back. But this was my opportunity to first of all just say, well, let's take the spotlight off of Scream and focus on this first 5 years of horror just trying to get its footing, and figure out its identity collectively. And so much was going on, whether it was they wanted to call it a thriller instead of a horror film to make better box office, or more serious topics, in the sort of passing the 80s greed is good. We're now in the hangover party element of, the early 90s are, there are a bunch of horror icons that want to stick around and be in more sequels, Freddy and Jason and Chucky and Michael Myers. Mike waited 5 years, but the idea is horror just was like kind of in reruns, kind of didn't know what to do, wanted to evolve. And it wasn't until like Wes Craven doing movies like People Under the Stairs and New Nightmare, sort of reinventing, getting into a meta mode, or Bram Stoker's Dracula with Coppola showing that you could elevate a classic novel. You could do a Dracula movie. It's a vampire movie, yeah, but let's call it Bram Stoker's Dracula. It's got that literary pedigree, and and it's spectacular. Yet you still have Keanu Reeves saying "whoa," and you have Anthony Hopkins chewing up the scenery. So I totally interrupted you, but I wanted to sort of step in and say this was a wonderful challenge to be able to sort of prove to people there's so much there and you don't need your Scream just yet.
Well, it was actually, you kinda answered a little bit what I was gonna say. I was just gonna say what were some of the differences or reactions that you got from, the fans of the 80s docs and then this one when you first heard? I mean, other than our praise.
After being able to see it, they uh, a lot of people are like, "This is my jam." I'm sure the '80s steal. A lot of people are like, sure the '80s steal the thunder, but I grew up in the '90s, and this is my era. This is my going to the video store and watching, on cable and seeing it in the theater myself. I was finally old enough to do that, and a lot of the quote unquote younger people than the '80s, people where that's their decade, they're saying, well, finally, a spotlight on our decade because our decade, I would argue that the first half of the '90s is kind of the Jar Jar Binks, of horror. There's the people when they were young, they watched it and they loved it, but everyone sort of turns their nose up at it. And so they kind of have to like, be quiet about their love and passion for it, or they just have to defend it, as to why there's so much good stuff. But collectively, if you look at studio releases, indie releases, straight to video, shot on video stuff, there's like yet again a mountain of material. And my biggest problem was I still couldn't fit it all in.
Yeah, I think we talked on the last time you were here. I was talking about how I felt like there, like you said, it was a memory hole. Like I think back to the '90s, and the only thing I could think of was Bram Stoker's Dracula, and that's it. And I couldn't think. I was like, I must not have watched any horror because that was my high school years. I must have just not watched this stuff. And then I'm watching the documentary, I'm going, I saw that, I saw that, I saw that, I saw that. And then I realized I had seen all these movies, or a good chunk of them. And for some reason, that I guess I'm just so '80s centric because that was like my childhood years. But I had kind of like blanked all these out, and it was so much fun to go back and see that.
Let's
Wait, you're not you weren't imagining that you actually did see these things.
But Tim, let's delve into the psychology, the collective unconscious of why people memory hold this area, this era, this first half. I don't have an answer. I want to investigate, but I mean, like, perhaps if you're a horror fan and, when it comes to nostalgia, the '80s really it had some staying power. The '80s were trendy for it feels like more than 10 years. You know how like every 20 to 25 years, a decade that was kind of popular comes back in terms of fashion and in terms of commercials and in terms of remember when and the nostalgia. People are older and they're remembering sort of the golden years of whatever it was 25 years ago. For example, like we grew up, we might have even talked about this at one point discussing the '80s. Like growing up in the '70s, everything was '50s. Grease was big, Sha Na Na, American Graffiti, that takes place in the early '60s, but still, it's got a very '50s centric vibe. John Carpenter, Joe Dante, Cronenberg. They're all picking their greatest favorite movies from the 50s and remaking them in the 80s. The Fly, the Blob. Joe Dante didn't remake it, but he's drawing from all that stuff. John Carpenter with The Thing. So I wonder if when you're talking about the 90s and your memory holding this, perhaps the 80s just had such incredible dominance. And maybe it's a Gen X thing where the Gen X is like, no, we're gonna continue to live in the
Yes.
glory years of this decade for about 20 to 30 years, whether you like it or not.
Yeah.
That perhaps enough people sort of poo-pooed the 90s, that you, from a horror standpoint, you're just like, well, I guess, I'm not, you don't pay attention, or maybe you don't revisit as much, or maybe it's
Mhm.
the stigma of bad CG that was only in select, it was in a lot of films, but only in select films where you're just like, wow, I'll never go back to that. You still go back to a lot of this stuff despite the CG. It's just a time capsule technology that doesn't age well. Doesn't mean that some of these films aren't still super duper fun. I just watched Anaconda again last night, and
Talk about CGI.
it's
It's
super
that one.
fun. It's
Yeah.
super outrageous. I always remembered John Voight, whatever you think of him now. I always remembered John Voight he stole that show. And I'm watching it again. He is the best thing about that. And yes, it has the worst CG moments, but they're mixed with lots of great practical, the world's biggest, anaconda practical, snake that they made. It's not an, it's, when the CG happens, it's pretty awful. But I maybe because I'm just making this documentary that now covers 95 to 99, I'm more forgiving because there's enough fun stuff around it where you don't have to discount an entire movie because there's some bad CG moments. So that's my either soapbox TED talk or rhetorical question.
So, and I think you touched on this. So, was the decision to do this one differently by splitting the decade in two versus the 80s, where you kind of just took the whole decade at one time and eventually in three parts, but started out just doing it in one installment? What was that the reason? Because you felt like the first half of the 90s differed in some way from the second half, so that it was a better format to split this into two than to try to cover the whole decade and maybe have Scream overshadow everything.
It wasn't a conscious reason to very specifically do it just for that reason. That was a participating factor. But truth be told, the biggest factor was Robin Block said, you know what, why don't we it's such a to start from scratch. We did the first 80s one, In Search of Darkness. When you do part two and you do part three, because I have it as kind of one long movie with carryover with footage from interviews that from the first one that didn't get used, and movies that were talked about but didn't get discussed, I could put it in part two, or I could put it in part three. So those two, part two and part three, were easier to, I mean, they were still very hard to make, and they're labels of love. But in terms of the foundation of the footage, it's a little easier because I already have a lot of the stuff that's already in the can. And it's kind of fun because I don't have to go back and redo these interviews. We actually did redo some people to get some new material. But ultimately, when you're building a brand new decade, and so now we're going to the 90s, Robin kind of thought, well, why don't we just keep it simple, divide it into two parts. You'll you'll make In Search of Darkness 90s 1994, you'll make that 3 hours, you know and then we'll do the second one, that'll be 3 hours, and then you get your 6 hour movie, da 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 da. And as we were doing it, I just said, if we're going to stick even with the half of the decade format, 3 hours still is it just feels slight. Can I have more time? Can I do more? And I won that battle, and it wasn't much of a battle because
Mhm.
he knows that the audience really wants this, and he's just like, well, if Alex wants to do it, and if you want to do it, and we can do it and deliver it in the time that allotted to turn these things around in a year, by all means. And lo and behold, I do my longest In Search of Darkness yet, 6
I was
hours.
gonna say, and this is the longest one after that. So, Tim, I think technically the next one I'm supposed to do is David kind of answered in this one,
Okay, yeah, we'll just move to the
right?
next one.
Yeah. So I'll
Fine,
just go to
yeah.
the next thing on your quiz. So we'll have to flip. It'll be now. I'm going to be Tim, and you're going to be. I can't do
I'll do my
his.
best Brian impression.
Yeah, you just got to go all New Yorker. I got to go all North Carolina. Oh, I love the glass. He had the creature glass. Okay. So so you guys, you always get like such great celebrity guests for these. That way, so how is the reception when you reach out and ask for participation with these? Has it become easier to get now after the '80s ones were so popular?
I kind of thought it would be, but it's the other way around. There are some people who respond right away, and that's always like I reached out to Kayla Cooper. She's a contemporary screenwriter. She's written Megan, The Nun
Right? Yeah,
2.
yeah, yeah.
She's written a bunch of stuff, and she's amazing. And boy, it was such a treat when I reached out to her direct email, and she responded in a moment saying, "Hell's yeah, I'm there,"
Oh,
you
that's
know?
awesome.
So she loved it, she was right, and Mike Flanagan was like that too, these 2, this is their decade, they grew up as teens in the 90s and really just soaked all this stuff up. And they knew of In Search of Darkness and they just said, "Go, well, yeah, I want to do this." But I really kind of thought because I don't parade around thinking, "Don't you know who I am? I'm the director of In Search of Darkness." You know, you know, publicists and managers and agents, they don't know. Most 99.9% of them know. So we're always up against those folks trying to explain to them who we are and why this is relevant and why this would be good for their client. If we can find some back door or side door to get their attention without having to go through their quote unquote the flack, the representation, that's usually much more of an easier process. But I think there's also an element where a lot of these folks who were starring in these 90s horror movies that we love and we're reviewing now, they still have strong careers, you know, or they've had some career resurgence. And so here we come along saying, please come relive your glory days of 30 years ago. And they're just like, there's a certain element of like, I'm not there yet. I'm only looking forward. Like we get a lot of that. People respond saying, well, they don't want to look back. They want to talk about their newest project, that kind of stuff like that. So you really have to sort of wage a campaign of explanation to explain to a lot of these folks, whether it's the talent or their representation, why this is a valuable project for them. But it's I would not be truthful if I didn't say it wasn't hard, for not only the first part, but now this one as well. We're getting some great names. I'm gonna name drop a brand new name that no one's ever heard before, because I
Wow.
just interviewed him this morning. And I just want to talk in terms of talent for In Search of Darkness 1995 to 1999. We carrying over, when I sat down with everyone from 90 to 94, I basically banked the rest of the decade. So everyone I spoke to, if they had a movie in 95 to 99, of course I talked to them about that. But even if they weren't in a movie or had a movie, they would still talk about a couple of their favorites. So on top of that, bringing a bunch of folks over, like John Carpenter, like Doug Bradley, like gosh, Amelia Kincaid talking about, Night of the
Oh, yeah.
Demons 3, that kind of stuff. There's
I had an interesting elevator ride with her once
I'll bet,
at New,
I'll bet she
yeah, New
probably
Jersey
talked to
HorrorCon. Yeah.
probably talked to you about animals. But she anyway, but of course we're getting a lot of brand new folks, but I wanted to sort of put a caveat that we're not really announcing too many names because we're still in production. And so I don't want people to look at the names that we announce. I mean, I say, and many more to come, many more to be announced, when this movie comes out at the end of the year and we do the final sale. Because, people say, well, great, but where's this and where's that? And what about this and what about that? But I had a wonderful, amazing, really fun and entertaining chat with Lou Diamond Phillips this morning,
Oh, wow. That's
talking about
well, he did
bats,
Bats. Yeah.
bats,
Yeah.
and the
Yeah.
first power, even though that's
Oh,
earlier
right.
in
Yeah,
the
yeah, yeah.
90s.
I
You
saw
know,
another movie with him, like, somewhat, recently, I think that was a horror movie too that I
werewolf,
didn't know he did.
werewolves, or are you talking about Route 666?
It might have been that one. It was definitely one that was not as, uh, known as as Werewolves was, but, yeah, it was through the horror challenge, I think I was looking for something, and he happened to be in it. I gotta dig it up now, but it was like and I was he was so good in it because he's always good. I mean, it's
Yeah. He dovetails every now and then into horror, and we were very, very, very happy that he's like, "Yeah, sure, let's talk about it." So, had a great chat with him today.
oh,
Very
nice.
cool.
That's cool.
So we
And
do
just for
get
the
we
record, by
do
the
get
way
some sorry to interrupt, but we do get, we get good people, but, it can be quite the uphill battle.
I was gonna say, just for the record, Tim and I go around saying, "Hey, don't you know who we are? We're friends with the guy that did In Search of Documentaries." That got us, I think, what, a
Guys,
couple of cups of coffee, right?
I left you the +1 at the door. You're supposed to be able
I
to you're
didn't
supposed to talk to the bouncer.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I don't think my cred as a Civil War podcast host has ever gotten me anything close to as valuable as a cup of
Yeah.
coffee, Brian.
I
But
no, I don't I'm trying to think if it got us anything, other than, like, screeners from Shudder,
yes.
I think
I
might
tell
be
you, it's real fun for the ego until you're instantly deflated, but it's kind of fun walking around saying just randomly, "Don't you know who I am?"
I
I'm the Sausage King of Chicago.
I,
Anyway, so back to In Search of Darkness, 1995 through
Oh
1999.
yeah,
David,
okay.
tell us
Yeah.
how listeners can get a hold of this. What
They
should
have
they
to go. They should go. They must go because it's exclusively only at 90shorrordoc.com. So 90s horror doc, DOC, 90shorrordoc.com. Between now and June 9th at midnight, you can pre order, get your name in the credits, get all the cool swag that we normally do, get, exclusive updates and like announcements like I did today, but it's private, but there's also sorts of cool stuff. But if you go there, you'll see all the things you can get. I hate being a listicle. If you can get this and this and this plus a Ginsu knife, but the thing is,
oh,
uh,
yeah, it could chop a can. Yeah.
but there's cool stuff in that. If you missed In Search of Darkness 90 to 94, you could buy that independently as well, or you could buy a 2-pack where we have a really cool slipcase where you could put 90 to 94 and 95 to 99 in the slipcase. If you missed In Search of Darkness, the 80s trilogy, you can get those. If you're not a person who loves to collect physical media, um, then you can get
Oh, is
the digital.
that?
You can get digital, yeah. You can get the digital copies as well. So you can get a digital bundle, or you can get individual films digitally. But you get everything. You get the movie as a Blu-ray. You get the soundtrack as a download. You get a digital download. Two amazing, super cool posters. Really,
So
really
I have
amazing.
all the posters so far, by the way. I have everything. In fact, I was gonna say I'm going for the one that's like 119 because it comes with and there's a Tim, the biggest you thing. It comes with like a checklist, like a physical
That's
checklist of
another
Oh,
all the
thing.
stuff.
yes,
We
yes.
try to do something new every year. We're trying to make it very collectible. This is like a collector's item because these are it's a limited numbered, and we're literally giving you a certificate which number it is. It's
David
limited.
knows how to get me to buy things. He does.
Yeah.
But it's, we try and mix it up each and every time, and we just thought, how cool would it be to have a checklist of all the 90s movies, so we didn't include that as a poster that you could do. We do it in the booklet, the cool booklet. You get a reversible. See, now I'm doing the list of things, but there we
We
try and
fell
make
into our trap. No.
quality stuff. As a consumer myself, I'd be like real happy getting this care package of a box with so much cool stuff.
Yes. Speaking of, yeah, no, I'm all about that kind of stuff. Like, in fact, I wanted to, I couldn't find a way to throw this in, but in your honor, when I saw Final Destination, Bloodlines, I wore the, In Search of 90 to 94, hoping to get someone to ask me what it was, but the problem was is we were running late for the rare instance where we ran late, and I ran right into the theater, and
Ah,
right as the trailer was starting, so, like, it was dark around, so I'm like, "No one could see it." But
Oh,
I'll wear it around, next
well,
time,
wear it
to
again,
wherever I go.
thanks. Hang around at the bathroom and point at it and see if someone says anything.
I did that
That's a
once. I
high
got some
traffic
weird looks
area.
doing that, though.
It's a high traffic area after
Yeah.
the movie, you know?
Well, yeah, no, it's funny because though, like, our old Civil War shirt, the original one, actually, we got a guest because they liked that. Remember that shirt that time when
Oh, that's right. Yeah, we
that
did.
one guy, what was it? I
Oh,
forgot
very
his name,
cool.
Neil.
Well, listen,
Yeah.
it's a grassroots effort, right?
Oh, and I thought of you, David, when I made this purchase too. I bought from NECA online the recreation of that Jaws game. Remember where it
Oh,
was
you
like the
did.
yeah, I bought it.
Very
It's sitting in my closet. I'm gonna because I wanna do an opening video, like an unboxing. I've never done one of those, so I wanna make sure I get that all set up. We're in the process kind of a move, a couple of blocks away, so, I figure once I get that set up, I'm gonna do that because I cannot wait to open that thing because I had that as a kid. And do you
Mhm.
I'm gonna tell you the store where I remember my mom purchased that for me, see if you remember from the old West Coast days. Do you remember Cresco's on Central
Cresco
Avenue?
Crescos.
It was by the TSW toy store on Central Avenue, down more Hartsdale, but, there was also
Well, wait, TSW, Toy and Sports Warehouse you're talking
yes,
about? Toy
yes,
and
it was
Sports
down
Warehouse with
there.
there was a Toy and Sports Warehouse in Scarsdale that was very close to me. I only
Oh, there were
remember
2, you're right. There was one by you also, that's right.
I only remember Child World on
Tower,
Central
yeah.
Avenue. So,
Okay,
was
there's
there
Child
also a
World and that Toys R Us all the
TSW?
way down in, like, the end of Central Avenue when it
Toys
just
R
started
Us?
looking
Are you sure?
that
See,
was later. That was, like,
you're
more when I was
mentioning
in high
2
school.
things that are just making me wonder how I could have missed those as destinations to bug my parents to go find more Star Wars
Well,
toys.
I think the Toys R Us was closer to the Cross Country Plaza or Cross County Mall, that area. It was down further, like, by Yonkers, like,
Okay, alright,
down
fair.
close there. But, yeah, no, there was a Cresco's was kinda like I'm trying to think of the equivalent of it now. It's kind of like a mix between a Walgreens and a Target kind of a thing, where it had a lot of everything, but smaller. Like, it was
You're
like
not
about a
talking about
Walgreens size.
you're not talking about Cowdoors, are you?
No, but I do remember Caldors, which Caldors to me was like the early like the what basically Targets were essentially, and I used to go to that Cald oh my god, I loved Caldors.
Or
When the
Tim.
one
Wait, I said Tim's
I know,
sleeping
but
with
Tim's
his
like, "What the
eyes
heck are they
open. He
talking
does a
about?"
good job
It's
looking
fine. No,
away.
it's fine. I had
Yeah,
my own share of weird stores. I mean,
yeah,
Well, for all
yeah.
the listeners out there, obviously, if you haven't picked up on this, Brian and I grew up in the same area of Westchester County, New York, and so the ultimate Gen X recollection, party is just talking about. Did you go to this place? Yeah, that was a great. Did you go to that place? Yeah, that was a great
And
store.
we lived like 10 minutes
That's
away
our
from each
world
other.
as a kid. Sorry.
Yeah, it's hilarious how close we literally were to each
Well,
other back then.
you were in Hartsdale, so there was a while where there was Kitty City, but then that went out of business, and that became a Crazy Eddie's.
Oh god, Crazy Eddie. There was a Crazy Eddie in that shopping center also with the Crescos. That was
Maybe
the one.
that's the one I'm thinking about, and I just didn't know that Cresco's was a thing.
Yeah,
I was
Crescos,
young. I
it
was
was
young.
also you know what else was there? Do you remember Turco's? I know it sounds like I'm making up words here, but no, it was a supermarket next to the TSW named Turco's that my mom went. But you know what? My
I
mom
used
is
to
like,
go to Glimglops. Did you ever
yeah,
go to Glimglop?
that's what I said. I know. It's what
that's
I'm
what it sounds
speaking
like
it.
to my ears.
I know, Tim's like, "What the heck are you talking?" But no, but, like, when I was a kid, like, my mom, if there was a grocery store that had a weird name to it, she'd find it, like, always, and, like, that was, like, I remember Turco she used to love, and as a kid, I still remember thinking, like, in my head it's funny how when you're a kid and the way your mind is not developed yet, and you hear a word and it just triggers a thing in your head, like, to me, I thought it was a supermarket that only sold, like, turkey because it was called Turco's. I didn't know. But, or do you here's one more, and then I promise we'll move on, Tim. Do you remember Financed? That old store Financed where you would buy the stuff and then they would take it away from you and you'd have to wait in, like, the warehouse
Layaway, yeah, it was a
yeah, and
layaway
it would,
place.
like, come down the ramp and then you'd leave. It was the weirdest,
Oh,
I
we
saddest
discovered
had
thing.
it was called Best Products here, but it was the same
Oh, I remember
concept.
Best. They had
Yeah,
Best in California.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's what
Oh,
we
that
could
was what
just
it
go
was here.
down. I mean, there were like in terms of like the weird titles, like there was Two Guys.
yeah. I think
Go to
David needs
Two
to do
Guy,
In Search of Westchester is his
right?
next documentary.
And then we could talk about the supermarkets because supermarkets, unless it's a massive chain, they're all just kind of very local. Like there was a Waldbaum's, you
Oh,
know,
yeah. I
uh,
worked at Wallbounds at one
and,
point.
I worked at Waldbaum's. I was a stock boy there,
Oh, this
but
is crazy. How did we not I don't know how we never ran into each other
but
as kids somehow.
I remember I moved to Chicago with my family, and there was one of the chains there is called it's a grocery store, but it's called Treasure Island. And I remember going by there like months and months and months until it dawned on me that I could go shopping for food there. Like I had no idea what it was. And I felt that same way when I moved to Los Angeles and there was Ralph's,
Oh, Ralph's and
and I'm just like,
Gelson's.
Well, yeah, like it was hard sometimes. I mean, not like it's that complicated, but
Yeah.
I would look for the brands that I knew, and there was no Wallbaums, there was no Treasure Island, there was no, there's these things like Gelson's. And anyway, you gotta learn like the local lingo just to know where to shop for your basic necessities. All right, this is an important conversation, by the way.
Yeah, it took me years to get between ShopRite and ShopWell, which was which is definitely a Westchester
Right,
chain.
right.
Yeah, but, so now thanks to Civil Gore, it's become now the grocery podcast, somehow, but, yes, never fails, right?
Well,
Oh, is it my turn,
sadly,
Tim? I don't even know where we are
well, I
on
was
this.
gonna say, sadly, I could talk hours about that shit.
Yeah. We'll have to do a bonus. That'll be our Patreon podcast. We'll have David come on and talk about grocery stores and
Yeah, well,
Westchester.
it'll be for an audience of perhaps like us, but
The one my mom would listen to. I don't know. She likes all the old Westchester stuff.
but
But
yeah, I mean, well, think of it this way: we all collectively, we are now pining for our childhood as it's further and further in the rearview mirror.
oh,
So
is it ever?
it's there's some magic just to. It's kind of like I'll bring it back to these movies, like the documentary stuff, where there's this magic for the video store. We were shopping at the video store every weekend, whether it was the mom and pop store or it was Blockbuster or, whatever the name of the place was, we were there all the time, as much as we were at the movies or watching these movies on cable. And we found some of our favorite movies there. But little did we know that the days were numbered literally for the thing we completely took for granted. And I guarantee you that none of us, when we went to go get videos, it was an enjoyable experience, but it was not like no one said, "Oh, I can't wait until I could spend hours at the video store finding the movie that I want to find." It was a mission. You looked, you browsed, you got what you needed, you left. But now we really, really miss in the world of streaming and nothing tangible in your hand, just the idea of going and finding and discovering the stuff that you wanted to watch. That's just gone now. So I think when we think
Yeah.
back at our childhood at some of the more mundane places. Oh, I used to go to Caldors, or I used to go to Kitty City, or
Hell.
or being upset because I'm like, wait, there was a another TSW, Toy and Sports Warehouse,
Yeah.
on Central Avenue. What? There was a Toys R Us, because I saw the commercials for Toys R Us, but there wasn't anyone near me that I knew of. So I never went to a Toys R Us as a kid, right? My poor childhood.
I
Anyway,
know.
I digress.
I think well, literally, I made my mom drive all the way down to Yonkers to go to that Toys R Us because that was I think the only one. Like the Child World was closer. The Kitty City, Play World, all those were closer. But we went to I made her go take me to Toys. I was a brat as a kid, so yeah,
Well,
it's no
and
surprise.
Yonkers was also
Yes,
where all the great movie theaters were.
right. Well, now they have
So
the Alamo Draft House in Yonkers.
which used to be
Crazy.
Movie Land, which
Yep.
was
Oh, I
which was
miss
the
Movie
first
Land.
horror movie plex that opened up in the area.
So
There
I
was
saw
Central
Empire Strikes
Park,
Back.
which was nearby, that had two of them. That was pretty exciting. But then,
Yeah.
yeah, they opened that up, and in Hartsdale they had the Fine Arts Theater.
Yes, I remember, which I never did, which I was always like I was like mildly like obsessed and confused by that because you'd see the marquee and it would be a movie that you'd never hear of because it was all like weird art
I
stuff when I
remember
was going by.
when my dad took me to go see Dracula at with Frank Langella, the John Badham Dracula
See,
at
my mom took me to that too. See, I'm telling you, we had the same childhood.
Scarsdale Plaza.
Oh, I love the Scarsdale Plaza.
99 cents for that. And I remember my mom and my sister went to the Fine Arts Theater and they went to see a movie called Peppermint Soda. I remember the title. I couldn't tell you what it's
That's
about. Probably
crazy.
some coming of age French new wave
Yeah,
movie. But Tim, do you have a theater that made your childhood that you used to go to
Oh
where
yeah,
you
absolutely. We
watch
have so
theater
many,
movies?
yeah, so
That we
many theaters in town that have closed now, and like there was one. I think it's a bank now. There used to be a double. It used to be a two screen, and that's where I went and saw Superman 2. I believe was, and I'll never forget that. But yeah, there's so many theaters that are closed down now that are now like basically parking lots,
Oh
unfortunately,
gosh, yeah,
or
well,
apartment
yeah.
Yeah.
complexes.
I went to Scarsdale Plaza when I was back in Scarsdale after a very long period of not being there, years. You can never go home because I walked by to see my old stomping grounds and it was frickin' condos.
Yeah,
Uh,
there's like a Best Buy where like, well, the TSW was. I think there's a Best Buy now. It's like
oh,
everything's changed.
oh,
Yeah.
wait, hang on.
I
Okay.
Well, my brother lives
David's
still
stabbing
lives in
himself if
yeah.
you guys are wanting to
My
know.
brother lives still in Westchester now, so when I go back to New York, I can visit his place, and and then I'll make him take me to Hartsdale. Um, so actually, Tim, I noticed that after this question, the other two were kind of flipped, but we can combine it into one. I
Yeah,
realized, but
yeah.
this
Sorry,
quick one,
I totally derailed everything. Apologies. So
no,
please.
no, it was me. I started with the Hartsdale talk. I should have known it was going to get us into that zone, but
Hey,
they so this is something I don't know if you're allowed to tell us yet, but what after the release of this, which we know is going to be awesome, do you have an idea? I think we might have asked you this and you weren't sure back then, but I'm going to ask you again because maybe now it's been a year, almost, well, half a year, and you might be have a perspective now. Where do you think you want to head next? Do you want to go forward to like the 2000s, or is that still kind of because we're kind of still in part of it? Like it's still kind of too recent, or do you want to go back to like something like the 70s, which I know Tim will be all over that.
well, what would you guys like? You tell me what to do and I'll do it next.
Really? We get to choose? Ooh, that's exciting.
Perfect.
Yeah,
What would
I
you
know what Tim
prefer? What
wants.
would
Yeah.
you prefer?
I'm a huge 70s horror fan, so automatically gonna say 70s, but then again, I know it's also hard to get interviews with people from that worked on films in the
Yeah,
70s, and a lot of them passed, unfortunately.
it would have to be a little bit different just
It'd be a different
because
format, yeah.
but I would like to think most people are understanding that we can't conduct interviews at graveyards. So
Yeah.
it's not a doesn't work so well. But yeah, there's some people who are still around, but I think it would be more experts and talking heads and fans, well-known fans of that era. Filmmakers and whatnot that I've gotten talking about the era, even though they weren't part of it. I could easily put something together. Easy for me to say easily, but I could easily put something together that would be an absolute celebration of the era. That would be in the same style. Um, how about you, Brian? What are you gunning for?
So I too would love the 70s because I did like that was technically where I first started seeing horror movies as a, at the late 70s. But Tim, I'm just gonna bump into the second next question that'll get us back on track
Yeah,
with the
yeah,
names.
do it, 'cause
So
I was
I would
about to ask you.
Tim and I had kind of joked about this once, but I think what would be an amazing one would be In Search of the Universal Monsters.
Ah. Uh-huh. Mm-hmm.
So, and I know that's you are a big fan like us of that.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
And I know, like, I mean, that talk about a labor of love. I mean, you're like literally that's for that one, I can't imagine you would not have the best time doing that one.
I will be this is more of a me telling me this than me telling you this, but I will pretty much do this as long as people are clamoring for these kinds of movies, and as long as Robin Block wants to keep making them, and as long as everyone shows up when we have a pre-order and we have a final sale to help us get across the line to actually make these movies. But if the enthusiasm is there, if the desire is there, I have the time of my life making these movies. I'm very fortunate, and we have such a great team at Creator VC, and I can only heap praise on Robin Block for wanting to continue to make these documentaries because people love them so much. The community really, really responds positively. So I do not have an answer and that's not even me being cagey. But I got to tell you, we are probably leaning towards the '70s next. That's
Tim's
probably
excited.
especially compared to the 2000s.
Yeah.
I think we're gonna probably go back before we move forward again and see what we can put together and how we can put that together, and take the time to figure out how to best do it, but stick with the format that works. So yeah, that's kind of what we're looking at. I have conversations with Robin oftentimes when I'm at the peak of production, where he's gotten certain things out of the way, so he's kind of has clarity of vision and is planning the next year, and he's like, well, what can we do? And I'm like, he's like, would you want to do this? And what do you think? You want to do that? And boy, it's an absolute honor just to be asked to continue to do stuff for him. But on the flip side, I get very myopic, and I'm like, ugh, I can't think right now. I'm just like, I'm in 90s land right now. I'm treading 90s teen driven slashers right now. I can't really think of anything else. So we're beginning discussions, but not seriously, but it's definitely testing the waters with what's next. And yeah, maybe 70s, maybe something
That would
else.
be amazing. That would be amazing.
Well, if you need help, I know a nice young man from North Carolina that might be able to help you there. If to throw some movies out there that might be featured.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
okay, all right.
So, David, I'm going to give you the last question because I know we're coming up on time, and so you can feel free to answer this as short, as quickly, or as at length as you feel.
You know me, I'll
Yeah.
keep it to a one-word answer. Go ahead.
So this one's completely off topic. But as we were talking about the Universal monsters, Brian and I had this discussion on an episode recently, and we started discussing what would we do if we were in charge of rebooting this whole dark universe concept of rebooting all the Universal monsters. So kind of what would be your idea if you had to somehow recreate this dark universe concept that flopped for Universal? How would you approach bringing the Universal monsters back into modern times, or maybe not in modern times, but in modern filmmaking, even if they're period pieces?
Let's see. Sorry, I know I'm looking around funny because I'm looking for a book that I had as a kid, and now it's somewhere else. But it's all about it was a trivia book called "The World's Greatest Monsters," and anyway, I refer to it all the time. I haven't answered your question, but now I'm like totally focused on
But
finding it. I think it's in my.
just to give you an idea, it spawned from our love slash skeptical of how the latest Wolfman movie was. So that's
Yeah,
when we
well,
kind
the,
of
the newest one, yeah, the Lee 1L version one.
yeah.
Um,
Kinda what spawned our conversation because we did it on the was it last episode or 2 episodes ago? I can't remember now, but it was
I
the
think it
last
was.
one,
I think
right?
it was last episode. Yeah, yeah.
I'm giving it very serious thought because I want to give a diplomatic answer, but um, it's too powerful. The originals are too great, and for years and years and years, like you could say Bram Stoker's Dracula did Dracula well enough to make Gary Oldman's Dracula in many different forms incredibly iconic. But even that, it's kind of like remaking Battlestar Galactica. They did it once, and I was like, we don't need it remade. It was amazing. And then they
Yeah.
kept on saying there's going to be another one, but it's going to be a movie, but it's going to be entirely different cast. And there's going to be another one, but it's just the series again, entirely different cast, different showrunner. Like they're going to keep on going back to the well. I love Battlestar Galactica. I really loved the Ronald Moore series. I don't need any more. So with the Universal monsters, I cannot give you a satisfying answer because my thought process whenever I see all these movies, and I see them all, but even like going back to Stephen Sommers' Van Helsing, which was essentially his action packed Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein. Let's put everybody in, every monster in there, but just turn it into this action packed, vampire slayer Van Helsing against these guys. Mind you, at one point, Tom Cruise wanted to remake Van Helsing. And was going to do that. That's a well documented thing. And I was like, really? I feel like 5 minutes ago, we're just getting off the waft of Van Helsing. But long story short, I look forward to Maggie Gyllenhaal is doing Bride of Frankenstein,
I'm really looking
Looks
forward to
good,
that.
yeah.
Yeah.
That one seems
and
good.
Lee Wynell's Wolfman. I think as a standalone film called Wolfman about disease and as a parable, I think is a really great movie. I don't think, in all fairness, it's the Wolfman anyone expected it to be and hoped it to be. If anything, it made me reconsider the Benicio del Toro Wolfman by Rocketeer Joe Johnston. That's still a better movie. There's a really great movie in there. That is way closer to what I think we all wanted from the Wolfman if you're going to remake it. So this dark universe, listen, I'm all for theme park versions of it, but in the
Yeah, that
movies,
looks great.
the movies just make me want to go back to the originals, and I think they can and will and maybe should do remakes of the classic Universal monsters because there's a lot to mine. We're still waiting for. I think the latest is now. Uh, uh, I'm getting a moment there. Um, Conjuring and Aquaman. Um, the director.
James Wan.
James
Oh,
Wan is he's taking on a creature from the Black Lagoon.
Yeah.
Black Lagoon. It's still, you know,
Just hope he makes
it,
it old.
this is my guy.
Yeah.
Anything
Yeah.
anything different is going to be it's not going to be as good. And so that's really where I stand with all these. I will see them, I will appreciate them, I will support them, but it will just make me go back to the classics each and every time. And every time you remake something, you don't take anything away from the originals. You just shine a spotlight on them.
Well,
So
that's what
on that note, I have to wrap up.
yes,
Unfortunately,
okay.
I do have to run. I'm breaking my own rule. Uh, so I'm sorry, guys, but
No, it's okay.
oh no,
We'll have
no,
to talk more about this. We'll have you on again another million times. It's okay.
yes. Just keep making documentaries. You keep
Yes, please,
keep coming on.
please keep
and I'll
making
have
them.
that book in front of me next time.
Yes.
I don't know where it's sitting in my closet or something. It's in the
Yeah.
wrong place.
Nice.
Yeah.
But
Thanks so much, David. This is always a
Yeah,
treat.
thanks as always for coming on. It's always great to catch up with you. We never seem to have enough time, so it's
well,
okay.
that's a good thing. That's a good
Yeah.
thing. Leave us and everyone wanting more. But everyone go to 90shorrordoc.com. In Search of Darkness 1995 to 1999. It goes until June 9th at midnight. You could pre-order. Check it out. Tell your friends and support indie films and support indie filmmakers and spread the word. And you guys, I really appreciate you each and every time we sit down. It's always a blast. And thanks for your time and your support.